Let's start this third and last session today based on this TONG-LEN practice. Let's begin by having a look at what we'll be covering in this session. We'll start with a TONG-LEN meditation, which is really a sort of combination of the loving kindness and compassion practices we did earlier. Following that, we'll do a little bit of a summary of some of the main points we've covered over the last 2 days. Then we'll look at the TONG-LEN practice in a little bit more detail. Then we'll go back to that meditation again, expand that out a little bit further. After the meditation, dispelling some misconceptions regarding this TONG-LEN practice. Then we'll look at how to apply TONG-LEN in daily life. And then we'll look at how to integrate some of these practices that we've looked at in the last 2 days, how to integrate that into daily life. And then we'll finish with some question and answer. But let's start with meditation, TONG-LEN meditation. Find a nice comfortable posture. Let's begin. Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. In other words, keeping the back nice and straight, and at the same time allow the entire body to become completely relaxed. And having established a good posture, then keeping the body as still as possible, avoiding any unnecessary movement. Allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. And setting the mind in a state of ease and relaxation. Releasing all activities of the mind. And simply allowing the mind to come to rest. To come to rest in the stillness of the present moment. TONG-LEN is a Tibetan word, literally meaning giving and taking. And it's a very powerful practice to help transform the self-cherishing mind into the mind of cherishing others, to transform our attachment and aversion into loving kindness and compassion. And we can begin by practicing TONG-LEN with respect to ourselves, to cultivate loving kindness and compassion for ourselves, and then expand out to others. And we can begin by imagining the inner purity of our mind, a level of our mind that is untouched by any of the mental afflictions. To imagine this inner purity of our mind in the form of a small, white, radiant sphere of light at the center of your chest, at the level of your heart. And then arouse the thought, how wonderful it would be if I were free of suffering and its causes. May I be free of all suffering and its causes. May I be free of all mental afflictions. And then imagining your mental afflictions and suffering in the form of black smoke filling your body. And then with each in-breath, imagine drawing that black smoke into the sphere of light at your heart, completely dissolving it there. So with each in-breath, breathe in with compassion, dissolving and extinguishing your mental afflictions and suffering at your heart. And then imagine the black cloud is now completely extinguished. And now you're completely free of all mental afflictions and suffering. And simply rest in that freedom, rest in that purity of mind. And then arouse the thought, how wonderful it would be if I had happiness and its causes. May I be truly well and happy. And then with each out-breath, imagine rays of light radiating out from the sphere of light at your heart, filling your entire body and mind, and transforming into everything you need to be happy. So with each out-breath, breathe out the light of loving kindness, sending to yourself whatever you need to be happy, both in the short term and the long term. And then imagine you've now found the genuine happiness that you seek. And simply rest in that state of inner well-being, that inner purity of mind. And just as you wish to be happy and be free of suffering, so does everyone else. And so next bring to mind someone close to you, a loved one, who's currently experiencing some sort of physical or mental problem or suffering. And imagine them very clearly in front of you. And arouse the thought, how wonderful it would be if they were free of that problem, free of that suffering. May you be free of all suffering in its causes. And imagining their problem or suffering in the form of black smoke filling their body. And with each in-breath, imagine drawing that black smoke out of their body and bringing it into the sphere of light at your heart, completely dissolving it there. So with each in-breath, breathe in with compassion, dissolving and extinguishing their suffering at your heart. And then imagine the black cloud is now completely extinguished. And now they're completely free of that problem, free of that suffering. And take delight in this. And then arouse the thought, how wonderful it would be if they had happiness in its causes. May you be truly well and happy. And then with each out-breath, imagine rays of light radiating out from the sphere of light at your heart, filling their entire body and mind, imagining that it transforms into everything they need to be happy. So with each out-breath, breathe out the light of loving kindness, sending to them whatever they need to be happy in the short term and the long term. And then imagine they've now found the genuine happiness that they seek, and take delight in this. And then release all appearances and allow the mind to come to rest. To come to rest in the inner purity of the mind. Which is in the nature of loving kindness and compassion. And we can bring the meditation to a close. Let's begin with a short summary of some of the main points from this weekend. We saw that in all Buddhist traditions, we can talk about these two main wings of practice of wisdom and compassion, or vipassana and compassion. And that it's important that we focus on both wings, that only focusing on one of the two wings can lead us into difficulty. That if we only engage in the wisdom or vipassana practice without engaging in this compassion practice, then often we can become very self-absorbed, disconnected from the world, and sensitive to the sufferings of others, and even in extreme cases become very unethical. On the other hand, if we simply engage in the compassion practices and neglect the wisdom or vipassana practice, then we can become quite biased in how we help, unskillful, not knowing what we can do to help. We can end up with this burnout, empathy burnout actually, and we can also get taken advantage of. And so it's very important to have an integrated approach to practice, covering both of these main wings of practice. If we want to fly to the result of liberation, of enlightenment, we need both of these wings of practice. And so here this weekend, we've been looking at the compassion wing of practice, foundation level with these four immeasurable practices of loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. And then the last session and this session, we've been building on those in terms of this exchanging self with others and the TONG-LEN practice within that. And this is one of the two main methods historically used to cultivate this aspiration of bodhicitta. And also earlier yesterday, we looked at how to deal with anger and attachment. And in this session, a little bit later, we'll also look at how to integrate these various practices into daily life. And within those four immeasurables, we saw there that it's very helpful to have an integrated approach, to cultivate each one of these four immeasurables, because we saw that each one of these four has what's called a near enemy. It's very easy for that quality to degenerate. For example, for the loving kindness to simply degenerate into attachment, the equanimity to simply degenerate into indifference, and so on. And if we have an integrated approach, then what we saw there was one of the other four immeasurables acts as an antidote to the near enemy for that immeasurable. So therefore, if we practice all four of these elements, then we can largely avoid falling into those near enemies of those four immeasurables. And then we saw that in terms of dealing with anger and attachment, and we can apply this approach to all mental afflictions, is to first have a clear understanding of the anger or attachment or the mental affliction, what it is and how it leads to suffering, to first develop the aspiration to be free of it. Because particularly with things like attachment, we often feel like, well, actually attachment can be something useful. It's sort of seems to be giving me some happiness. But to really appreciate that all mental afflictions even if on the surface they seem to bring us something, all they're really doing is they're just bringing us suffering, and usually suffering also of people around us. To really develop a clear understanding, to develop the aspiration to be free of them, and then to really be able to start to deal with them, to also, as part of the preliminary practices, cultivate this view of genuine happiness, because all mental afflictions are really coming from seeing the source of happiness and suffering is out there. So as long as we continue to hold that worldview, it's going to be extremely difficult to really effectively deal with any mental afflictions. But if we've cultivated that worldview of genuine happiness, then we can start to really effectively deal with mental afflictions such as anger and attachment. And the first line approach to dealing with any mental afflictions is using mindfulness, because we need to be able to observe the mental affliction when it's starting to arise. If we only notice it when it's already taken control of our mind, there's not much we can do. So we have a little window of opportunity to catch the mental afflictions very early on. But to be able to do that, we need mindfulness. We cultivate mindfulness through shamatha practice. So hence shamatha practice, very important here in this context. And if we have more mindfulness, we can simply observe the mental affliction as it's arising, and then we're free of it. It has no power over it. It can't go anywhere. We don't need to fight with it. We just step back and watch, and it will simply dissipate itself. So this is a very effective initial approach to dealing with mental afflictions when they arise. And in addition to that, we can apply antidotes to the mental afflictions. And we saw there that a lot of the antidotes to mental afflictions come within the Vipassana wing of practice, antidotes such as impermanence and emptiness. And so therefore, also Vipassana practice in this context, very important. The ultimate antidote to all mental afflictions is a direct realization of emptiness. If we can come to a direct realization of emptiness, we can overcome distorted view and overcome all mental afflictions. So that is also the long-term strategy to overcome mental afflictions. And so here again, we can see in this context the importance of an integrated approach, that if we are engaging in not only the compassion wing of practice, but the wisdom wing, shamatha practice, and the preliminary practices, if we're covering all those bases, then that's going to be an effective approach, particularly here in this context of dealing with mental afflictions. And then we saw, in terms of building on the four immeasurables, the next level is within the Mahayana, this aspiration of bodhicitta, the aspiration for complete enlightenment for the benefit of others. The basis for that is renunciation. First, to have a wish for ourselves to be free of suffering, and then expand that out to include others. And within the bodhicitta, first we aspire to enlightenment, and then we actually move towards enlightenment by practicing these six perfections. And then the two wings of practice are often called the two bodhicittas. The compassion wing here is called conventional bodhicitta, the aspiration for enlightenment for the benefit of others. That's what's driving all of our behavior. And then the wisdom wing is this realization of emptiness that is really sustained by the mind of bodhicitta. So these are the two bodhicittas, the two wings of practice within the Mahayana Buddhist traditions. And then in terms of cultivating bodhicitta, we saw there that there are two main methods that were taught historically: seven cause and effect, and the equalizing and exchanging self with others. Seven cause and effect method could be a little bit problematical for us in the modern world. Two issues. One is that inbuilt into the process is an assumption of a belief in rebirth. And also, to see everyone as our mother, we may have some issues with that. So that might be difficult as well. But also, it can be a very powerful process. So it would be helpful to become familiar with it, to engage in that practice, to really be able to develop this wish, this great loving kindness, this great compassion, the wish to help all mother sentient beings as much as we can. But then we're really looking mainly at the second approach, the equalizing, exchanging self with others, which I think can be more relevant for us in the modern world, because this approach is directly addressing the selfish, self-centered attitude, which I think is very strong in our modern society. So this approach targets that directly head on. And so it's a 5-step process. We saw there that the first step, equalizing self with others, to put ourselves at the same level, understanding we all want to be happy, we all want to be free of suffering, we're all equal in that regard. And then we looked at some of the disadvantages of the selfish, self-cherishing attitude, and to really develop the aspiration to be free of it, to see that it only brings us suffering. That the selfish, self-cherishing attitude, if we don't reflect on it, superficially, it could seem like the me first attitude is our best friend bringing us happiness. But actually, it's our worst enemy, and it only brings suffering to ourselves and usually suffering to the people around us. And then in addition to that, reflecting on the advantages of cherishing others, to really develop the aspiration to exchange the selfish attitude for the attitude of cherishing others. And here on that basis, we have this very well-known quote from great Indian master Shantideva from the 8th century. He says, "Whatever joy there is in the world, all comes from desiring others to be happy. And whatever suffering there is in the world, all comes from desiring myself to be happy." So suffering is just coming from the me first attitude, and the happiness, the joy in the world comes from the attitude of cherishing others. And then on that basis of those two reflections, then to exchange self with others. That is, in daily life, whenever we notice selfish, self-cherishing attitude, then exchange and replace that as much as possible with the attitude of cherishing others. But if we're going to engage in some beneficial behavior, helping others, and we do this exchange, but we still notice there's still a little bit of residual self-cherishing, then still go ahead and help others. Because that's a very practical way over time to reduce more and more the selfish attitude. So don't let a little bit of selfishness stop you from helping others, because in the beginning stage, it's going to be very difficult to have a purely unselfish motivation. And that brings us now to the 5th step, which we'll talk about a little bit more detail now, and we'll go back and do that practice again, is TONG-LEN. And this is the meditation practice that we do in conjunction with the exchanging self with others in daily life. Again, TONG-LEN is a Tibetan word, literally means giving and taking. And what we're doing is we're imagining taking on the sufferings of others, and we're imagining giving them our happiness. And that's a very powerful method to transform the self-cherishing attitude. Because the last thing the self-cherishing attitude would want to do would be to take any suffering from anyone. And the last thing the self-cherishing mind would want to do would be to give away any happiness to anyone. So by imagining doing that, that is really subduing the selfish, self-cherishing attitude. Now, how to practice this? As with loving kindness and compassion and so on, we practice in stages. We go through these actually 5 stages. We first start with ourselves, comfortable there. We go to friends, and that's what we did in the previous meditation. The next meditation, we'll move out to the next level. We'll practice on stranger, someone that's neither friend nor dislike. And then we move out to the difficult people. And then eventually we can move out to all living beings. Now, with the TONG-LEN practice, we can join it with the breath. That helps us to stay focused. So there's natural time to take the suffering on the in-breath and give the happiness on the out-breath. And so that keeps us to stay focused. Now, the visualization we did is one of 2 types of visualization we can do. Or alternatively, as with the loving kindness and compassion practice, if you find the visualization you find it difficult and you don't find it very helpful, then also here in this practice, we don't have to do the visualization. We can simply do the aspiration, the repeated aspiration. So when we're taking, for example, the darkness in, continue, instead of visualizing that, just continue with the aspiration. May you be free of suffering and its causes. May you be free of suffering. And when we're sending the light out on the loving kindness, if you don't want to do the visualization, just every time on each out breath, repeat the affirmation, may you be truly well and happy. May you be truly well and happy. Now, there are two approaches to the visualization here in the TONG-LEN, particularly the compassion part. And the one we're doing is the traditional one that you find more commonly coming from the Tibetan tradition is a little bit different than what we're doing. So I'll explain that, and then I'll explain the one that we're doing. And in the next meditation, you can do either, actually, either visualization. Now, the more classic approach with the compassion part is, again, where imagine the person in front of us. We imagine suffering, they're suffering in the form of black smoke filling their body. And in the more traditional way of describing this, what we do when we're learning the practice is, again, on each in-breath, we imagine taking the black smoke out of their body. And in each in-breath, we're taking more and more smoke out, and it's gathering here in a small cloud in front of our face. So maybe we use half a dozen breaths to take out more and more smoke. And eventually it all is here in a small cloud in front of our face. Then the next step is to imagine the selfish, self-centered attitude as a small black rock in the center of our chest. And then using one in-breath, imagine drawing the black smoke in, it comes down, it touches the black rock, and they're both completely destroyed. The symbolism there is that it's our willingness to take on suffering that destroys the self-cherishing mind. And the second visualization is the one we've done, is instead of visualizing the black rock, we visualize the inner purity of mind and imagine the black smoke coming in, down, and the black smoke is completely dissolved in that light, that inner light, that inner purity. And the symbolism there is that inner purity is our inner wisdom, and it's wisdom that dissolves mental afflictions and suffering. So that is the symbolism there. Now, the first visualization, there is a danger of two things that actually could occur. One is that we identify with the black rock because we do the cognitive fusion. And so by visualizing the black rock of self-cherishing, we may simply just identify with it and saying and think, oh, I'm such a bad person. And then when we breathe in the smoke, we somehow breathe in the smoke to punish ourselves because we're such a bad person. And we hold on to that black smoke because we think we deserve it because we're such a bad person. So that's not the practice. And so therefore, to avoid that danger of cognitive fusion and just holding on to that black smoke and punishing ourselves because we're such a bad person, I prefer the second method, because one is we're focusing on the positive, on the inner purity of the mind. And secondly, then we're dissolving that into there. But also in the first one, we're not holding on to the black smoke. When the smoke comes in, it touches the black rock, they're both destroyed. So that's the correct way of doing that visualization. In the next meditation, next TONG-LEN practice, which we'll do shortly, if you prefer, the first part of the meditation where we're doing the compassion part, if you prefer, you can do, instead of the light, you can do the black rock. The second part is the same. So if you do the first part, the black rock, smoke comes, they're both destroyed, then you visualize the inner purity of mind for the second part, for the loving kindness, the giving part. So let's do that practice now. And again, for the first part, the compassion part, you can do either visualization. I'll describe the light one, but if you want to do the black rock, you can do that. And so now we did in the last meditation, we started with ourselves, we moved to friend. Now we'll start with a stranger, someone we know maybe well, but neither a friend nor someone we dislike. And then from there, we'll go out from there and roaming, just whoever comes to mind, and we'll work with them. Okay, let's do that meditation. Find a nice, comfortable posture. Let's begin. As always, we begin by preparing the body, allowing the body to become relaxed, still, and vigilant. Relaxing more deeply with each out-breath. And with each out-breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen. And simply allowing the mind to come to rest. To rest in the present moment. Allowing the mind to remain relaxed, still, and clear. Imagining the inner purity of your mind in the form of a small, white, radiant sphere of light at the center of your chest, at the level of your heart. And then bring to mind someone who you know well, but is neither a friend nor someone who you dislike. And imagine them very clearly in front of you. They're just like yourself in wanting to be happy and wanting to be free of suffering. And so arouse the thought, how wonderful it would be if they are free of suffering and its causes. May you be free of all suffering and its causes. May you be free of all mental afflictions. And imagining their mental afflictions and suffering in the form of black smoke filling their body. And with each in-breath, imagine drawing that black smoke out of their body and bringing it into the sphere of light at your heart, completely dissolving it there. And so with each in-breath, breathe in with compassion, dissolving and extinguishing their mental afflictions and suffering at your heart. And imagine the black cloud is now completely extinguished. And now they're completely free of all mental afflictions and suffering. And take joy in this. And then arouse the thought, how wonderful it would be if they had happiness in its causes. May you be truly well and happy. And with each out-breath, imagine rays of light radiating out from the sphere of light at your heart, filling their entire body and mind, and transforming into everything they need to be happy. So with each out-breath, breathe out the light of loving kindness, sending to them whatever they need to be happy. And then imagine they've now found the genuine happiness that they seek. And take joy in this. And then allow your field of loving kindness and compassion to expand out further. And allow your mind to move around. And whoever comes to mind, whether it's a friend, a stranger, or even a difficult person, attend to them. May you be free of all suffering and its causes. And may you be truly well and happy. And breathing in with compassion, dissolving and extinguishing their suffering at your heart, and breathing out the light of loving kindness, sending to them whatever they need to be happy. Allow your mind to continue to move around. Whoever comes to mind, whether it's an individual or even a group of people, attend to them. Breathing in with compassion, breathing out the light of loving kindness. No matter how much darkness is drawn in, it is all extinguished without a trace. And no matter how much light is sent out, it is sent out from an inexhaustible source that is in no way depleted. Allowing the mind to continue to move around, breathing in with compassion, breathing out the light of loving kindness. And then release all appearances and allow the mind to come to rest, in that inner purity of mind. Which is in the nature of loving kindness and compassion. And we can bring the meditation to a close. Just now to clarify some doubts regarding this practice. One doubt or even concern that can come up is if we're, say, doing this practice for someone who has a very serious illness, will we get that sickness from them? And the answer is no, we can't actually take any physical sufferings, physical problems from others. Because it's a mental exercise. We're imagining doing that. But then once that's explained, then people go, well, if we can't actually take any physical suffering from anyone, what's the point of the practice? The point is that you are the main beneficiary of this practice, is that TONG-LEN helps us to reduce self-cherishing and increase the mind of loving kindness and compassion. And so therefore it will indirectly help others, because if we do this practice effectively and reduce our selfishness, increase our loving kindness and compassion, It means not only will we more likely to help people in daily life who are suffering, but we'll help them in a more genuine way. Because sometimes now when we help people, it's really often can be from this me attitude, me first attitude. I know what's best for you. You'd better do like this, rather than really doing things for their sake. And so therefore, we're more likely to help people in a more genuine way. That's how we can how this practice indirectly helps others. But I think at a very subtle level, it can also have a subtle impact on others due to the interdependent nature of reality, particularly if we have a close connection with the person we're doing this practice with, even if they're on the other side of the planet, then due to the interdependent nature of things, and I think there may be some scientific support for this, that by us mentally doing this practice for them, directed towards them, we could have a direct, subtle, positive impact on their mind. So never underestimate the power of the mind. One more thing actually I want to mention here, and actually I find this a little bit sad, is that if we're going to do this TONG-LEN practice for others, then usually it's best to do that without telling them. Because if we tell them we're doing it, then it could sort of turn into a sort of ego boost. I'm doing this practice for you. You better appreciate that. How wonderful I am that I'm doing this for you. So rather to do it anonymously, unless, of course, you feel like by telling them that would help them feel like they're being supported and so forth, then it's okay. But the other thing that I've heard is that they did a study, or maybe a couple of studies, on the effects of prayer, of people praying for other people who are sick, and telling them that they were doing that. And actually the result of the study was that telling people you're praying for them because if they're sick or so forth, actually in general has a slight negative impact. I find that very sad. I'm not sure, I didn't find out why that is. Maybe it's because then the people who are being prayed for feel like they're under pressure, or that somehow people are imposing themselves on them. But whatever the reason is, that apparently it had a slight negative impact if you told people you were praying for them. So again, for that reason, again, maybe also best to do this anonymously, to just do this for others. Then also there's less likely that it'll become a bit of an ego trip, that boosting the ego by telling people how wonderful you are in terms of doing this practice for them. How to apply TONG-LEN in daily life. This is a meditation practice. And so the meditation practice of TONG-LEN can be very powerful. It can really start to transform our attachment aversion into loving kindness and compassion. But like every practice has two parts: meditation and integrating into daily life. And this TONG-LEN practice can be very powerful also to use it in daily life. How can we apply this TONG-LEN in daily life? We can use this TONG-LEN practice all day long, because once we're familiar with this practice, we can do the complete practice on one breath. On the in-breath, take suffering. On the out-breath, give happiness. Meaning that, for example, when we see others suffering in daily life, maybe it's obvious that they're physically or mentally suffering, then on one breath, we can take their suffering, give them happiness. And so we can do this all day long. But of course, this is not a substitute for helping people. We could have this illusion that, I'm a very compassionate person because I'm doing this TONG-LEN for people all day long. But yet when the opportunity arises to help people, we don't. Then it's sort of lip service. We're not really being authentic in our TONG-LEN. It's just really a sort of smoke and light show. And we're not really cultivating loving kindness and compassion. So it's not instead of helping others. And then also another occasion where we can use this TONG-LEN practice in daily life is when we ourselves are suffering, physically or mentally. Often what happens when we're suffering physically and mentally, and we don't really know how to alleviate it quickly, what we do is we just develop aversion. We go, oh no, not again, not again, go away, go away. And that aversion just magnifies the suffering we experience. And so the first thing we can do is, if we're suffering, is practice acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean resignation. Acceptance simply means acknowledging in the present moment, I'm experiencing this unpleasant situation. And then we can follow the advice from Shantideva. And that is, he says, if a situation can be remedied, why get upset? Just fix it. And if a situation cannot be remedied, what's the use in getting upset? For example, let's say we've got a migraine headache. Now, probably often if we have a migraine headache, we go, oh no, not that again, go away, go away. And that aversion to the migraine headache will just magnify the suffering we experience. So rather than having aversion, we practice acceptance. And acceptance says, okay, I've got a migraine headache. My experience is that even if I take medication, it doesn't really help. I just have to wait it out. Okay, it too will pass. And so at least we won't have aversion. So at least we won't magnify the suffering, the discomfort we experience. But then we can take it one step further with this TONG-LEN practice. We can make that suffering or unpleasant situation a meaningful situation. For example, again, using the migraine headache, we can understand that, well, we're not the only person on the planet with a migraine headache at the moment. There must be thousands of other people with migraine headaches at the moment, and maybe much worse than mine. So by me willingly accepting my migraine headache, may all others be free of theirs. And so we can do the TONG-LEN practice, taking everyone's migraine headaches from them, giving them happiness, giving them peace of mind. And so we can do this and make that a meaningful situation. And also what you will probably find is that because now we're focusing on others, then maybe with loving kindness and compassion, you may find that even that loving kindness and compassion maybe even subdues the discomfort even more. And maybe you don't even have any discomfort from the migraine headache. We see this sometimes examples in very intense situations. For example, let's say there's been a car accident and you and your partner are in the car and you've been injured seriously, but you're so concerned about the welfare of your partner. You may have a broken leg and normally you would have a lot of suffering, but now you're so concerned about helping your partner, you don't even really notice so much that you've got a broken leg. So similarly here is that not only can we make, instead of getting self-absorbed in our migraine headache and dwelling on poor me and magnifying suffering, we can focus on others and do this TONG-LEN practice and make it a meaningful situation. So this is how we can use TONG-LEN practice when we ourselves are suffering. That doesn't mean, of course, if we're suffering, and we can resolve it, we don't resolve it. So if we've got some physical suffering and taking some pain medication will help alleviate that, then yes, we're not saying torture ourselves. But if we can't resolve it immediately, then we can use this TONG-LEN practice. Another situation, I think, where this TONG-LEN practice can be very helpful in daily life is when we're about to meet a difficult person. Let's say, for example, we're about to go into a meeting at work and we anticipate that it's not going to go well and that person will be very reactive towards us and we'll probably react back. So generally, when we go into those difficult situations, we go in we're on the defensive, meaning that if they say something little provocative thing, we explode, we react. And so that's not very helpful. So therefore, what we can do when we're meeting a difficult person is to do this TONG-LEN practice. As we're physically approaching that person, take their mental afflictions and suffering, give them happiness. And so then we're not in this defensive mode, reactionary mode. we're open-minded more with loving kindness and compassion. And then if they say something provocative, rather than reacting with anger, we're more likely to be able to respond with compassion. And also, as we're about to engage with that person, shift perspective. Not have the perspective, how is this situation going to affect me? But how is that person seeing this situation? That's also going to help to be able to help us to respond with compassion and loving kindness rather than reacting with anger and so forth. And again, avoiding that cognitive fusion. That not to see if they're engaging in some not so good behavior, not to see them as a bad person, but seeing them as engaging in some sort of harmful behavior. Again, it will help avoid reacting with anger, be able to respond more with compassion. So these are some ways that we can apply this TONG-LEN practice in daily life. And so now how to integrate these practices that we have looked at this weekend into daily life. How to set up the day. Always good to start the day with a positive motivation. And this is the one I really like a lot, very short and to the point, and I find very helpful. From His Holiness Dalai Lama, every day, he says, every day, think as you wake up, I'm going to benefit others as much as I can. If we have that attitude, or set that motivation in the morning, that's setting our day in a good direction already. And then to do daily meditation first thing in the morning, because it's when generally we're most fresh, it's most quiet, and a good way to start the day. And I would recommend there in the morning to start with a little bit of shamatha practice to calm and focus the mind. And then specifically relating to what we've been doing here, the TONG-LEN practice. The TONG-LEN practice really covers pretty well all the 4 bases of the 4 immeasurables. So if you want one practice that really covers all of them pretty effectively, TONG-LEN. And what you can do in a practical way is do the TONG-LEN practice for specific people, specific situations that you probably are about to encounter that day. And so that will also help you prepare for those situations. Again, if there's some difficult person at work you're going to meet, or someone in your family or friend is suffering physically or mentally, you can do this TONG-LEN practice for them, and so forth. And as we saw in this program, it's very important to have an integrated approach, that even though we've only focused primarily on the compassion wing this weekend, there's the 2 main wings of wisdom and compassion, or vipassana and compassion, but they are also on the basis of the shamatha practice, and that is really on the basis of preliminary practices. And so therefore, if we can engage, if we have enough time and energy to engage in 2 sessions in the morning, then I would recommend the first session would be shamatha, maybe 15-20 minutes of shamatha, and then 15-20 minutes of an analytical meditation, maybe one of the preliminaries, such as precious human life or compassion practice or vipassana practice and so forth. But if you're only doing 1 session, then I would recommend some sessions just doing shamatha, but in some sessions then doing a more analytical practice, one of these preliminary practices, or compassion or vipassana practice. And the topic of one of these analytical meditations, and the preliminary practices, compassion practice and vipassana practice, are all analytical style meditations. We're investigating and so forth. And so here we can be flexible in terms of what is relevant to us at the moment in our life, and what can be helpful for what's going on in our life at the moment. If, for example, if we find that we're being very lazy when it comes to meditating, we find we're too busy and so forth, then preliminary practices is very helpful, particularly reflecting on precious human life and death. That is very, very helpful if we find ourselves lazy when it comes to meditating, or we find our life is too busy, too many things going on in our life. And that will be very, very helpful for that. If we find ourselves suffering from a lot of low self-esteem, a lot of anger or hatred, then loving kindness, compassion practices, particularly toward ourselves, very helpful. If we're finding a lot of jealousy or a lot of despair, then empathetic joy, focusing on the positive aspects of ourselves and others, rejoicing. That's very helpful for that. If we find a lot of grasping and attachment to things, Vipassana practice, impermanence or emptiness, very helpful for that. So again, we can focus on those types of meditations which we find very helpful and relevant to what particularly is going on in our life at the moment. So that's what to do in the morning. Then to integrate all of these various practices into daily life. And as we saw with dealing mental afflictions, we need mindfulness. So to see the day with mindfulness. And we can do that using triggers, either using an app, which we can program to maybe send a bell every hour or so, or for example, when we have a lot of tension, then stop whatever you're doing and then do a short mindfulness exercise, maybe focusing on the breath for 3 breaths. And if we do this intermittently through the day, we'll start to develop the habit of being more and more mindful through the day. And then with that mindfulness, then to engage in this witnessing mode, what we called open awareness in the 2 weeks ago in the shamatha practice. And here, this quote from Viktor Frankl, which I really like, he says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. That space is only possible to gain access to that space with mindfulness. Without mindfulness, we're just going to be stimulus reaction machines. Stimulus comes, we'll react out of habit. We won't have that opportunity to choose our response. And therefore, we won't have the possibility of growth and freedom from suffering. So if we want to be able to grow as a person, we want to have freedom from torment by mental afflictions, we need mindfulness through the shamatha practice. With that mindfulness, there's that space, stimulus between stimulus and reaction or response. And then we can choose to respond. We can see the stimulus, and instead of reacting with mental afflictions, with attachment, aversion, jealousy, we can choose to respond with loving kindness and compassion. And then we can grow and we have freedom from the mental afflictions. And also during the day, avoiding cognitive fusion in the way in which we think and speak towards ourselves and others. That's going to be very helpful as well. And again, when we're interacting with others, shifting perspectives, always trying to view the situation from a much broader perspective, not simply viewing the situation from how is this situation affecting me? Because then more likely to have this me first attitude, more likely to have attachment, anger, jealousy, and so forth. Try to view the situation from a second person perspective. How is that person seeing the situation? Or third person perspective from outside. How is this situation for everyone involved? And then again, in a practical way, this TONG-LEN practice, as we've just seen, we can do this TONG-LEN practice, increasing loving kindness and compassion throughout the day when we see others suffering, when we're faced with difficult situations. And again, what we've seen yesterday with the 4 Immeasurables, that very important to focus on the positive aspects of ourselves and others. When we have this obsessive focus on the negative in the modern world and with cognitive fusion, we desperately need to address that and really find a balanced view of ourselves and others, to really focus on the positives through this empathetic joy, to have joy, to rejoice in our own and others' positive actions and results. And again, avoiding cognitive fusion and really practicing this gratitude for the things that we receive throughout the day. And this empathetic joy, focusing on the positives, can be very powerful to really shift our perspective of our life, to shift our perspective of the world. So I very much recommend this as well. And then what to do at the end of the day. If we have time and energy, then to do a second meditation at the end of the day. So if we have space and capacity to do 2 meditation sessions in a day, one at the beginning and one at the end, then what I would recommend is in the morning, mainly focusing on shamatha, but also we can add a little bit of TONG-LEN and compassion and so forth. But then in the second meditation at the end of the day, where we're probably a little bit fatigued, then maybe trying to do some shamatha meditation, focusing on the breath or so forth in the end of the day, may be quite challenging. We're easy to fall into dullness or drowsiness. We probably need a more active meditation. And so one of these analytical meditations, preliminary practices such as reflecting on precious human life and death, one of the compassion practices, TONG-LEN or loving kindness, compassion, or one of the Vipassana practices, impermanence, emptiness, and so forth, no self. And if we are a little bit fatigued at the end of the day, but we have time for meditating, space, you can use the Shavasana posture to do these meditations. But then I think what we can all do, even if we don't have time to meditate in the evening as well, is that when we go to bed, go into that Shavasana posture. And then the first thing to do is to review the day. How did the day go? And do these three things we mentioned before. Pick one negative thing we did during the day and go through these four opponent powers: regret, reliance, remedy, resolve. And so this is really purifying negative habits, reducing negative habits, compassion for ourselves. Pick one positive action we did during the day. Rejoice in that, make a resolve, strong determination to continue to do that again. So this is empathetic joy and also loving kindness. And then also one thing we received during the day and practice gratitude for that. And so that is also empathetic joy. And then the last thing we can do is use the Shavasana posture to transition to sleep. Because often if we have very busy, hectic days, and we go to bed, maybe there's still a lot of things churning around in our mind from the day, maybe a lot of tension in the body still, and we find it difficult to fall asleep, tossing and turning and so forth. So then go into the Shavasana posture, and then on every out breath, releasing any tension in the body, releasing any thoughts in the mind. Just keep doing that, relaxing and releasing, releasing, releasing. Do that as long until you start to become drowsy. And when you become sleepy or drowsy, you mentally note the meditation is finished, and then you physically move out of that posture into whatever posture you use for sleep. And so this is an excellent way of transitioning to sleep, because this is also a little bit of shamatha practice, this mindfulness and releasing and so forth, but emphasizing the relaxation. So this is a very good way to finish the day. Even if we don't have the time and energy to meditate in the evening, at least we can do this review for the day because it's short, it doesn't take much time, and then we can do this wonderful transition into sleep. So this is a little bit how we can integrate some of these things into our daily life. And so that's all I really wanted to cover in this session. So now we have time for question and answer. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. And again, I'll try to answer the questions as best I can. Do we have any questions at all?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Okay, we have a question.
Okay.
Lalit is asking, possible to explain again the first stages of black smoke and symbolism?
The question is with the using the black rock of self-cherishing, the alternate visualization, is that the question? The symbolism or the way we're doing it? Well, actually, I'll explain both. There we go. We'll cover both bases. So with this TONG-LEN practice, the more traditional way that it's taught coming from Tibet is that when we are taking the black smoke, which is symbolizing the mental afflictions and suffering, then what we're doing is we're drawing it out of that person's body and bringing it in, imagining it comes down, goes in through the nostrils, comes down through the middle of our chest. And at the middle of our chest, we visualize a black rock, small black rock, and that is symbolizing our self-cherishing mind, the selfish self-cherishing mind. And imagining drawing that black smoke in, it comes down, it touches that black rock, and they're both completely destroyed. And the symbolism there is that it's our willingness to take on suffering. which destroys the self-cherishing mind. So that's the symbolism of the black smoke and the rock being completely destroyed. The visualization that we were mainly doing was that we visualize the inner purity of our mind as a small white light in the center of our chest. And that is, and then when we pull in the black smoke, imagine it comes in through the nose, goes down, and it gets completely dissolved in that light at the center of our chest. And the symbolism there is that that inner light is symbolizing our inner wisdom. And it's our wisdom that dissolves, destroys all mental afflictions and suffering. So that is the other symbolism. So both of those symbolisms, I think, can be very powerful. And we can use either of those two visualizations. And again, the one we prefer. And again, if we don't find that, and again, with this TONG-LEN practice, the visualization is not the most important thing. You know, we could have very nice, we could certainly turn it into a light and smoke show. You know, we can have very nice looking smoke and very nice looking light, but it's just, you know, smoke, light. I mean, so what? That doesn't do anything. The main point of the practice is wanting to take the suffering, wanting to give happiness. That is the key to the practice. The visualization just empowers that. But if you find the visualization not helpful or you find it difficult, then leave it out. The important thing is the aspiration. May you be free of suffering. May you be truly well and happy. That's the key to the meditation. Okay. Any other questions?
Yes. Okay. The anger is defined as a will to harm the other.
Intention
How do
to
you
harm.
define intention to harm? How do you define fear and anxiety? But the definition,
well,
like the anger.
Again, yeah, good question. We saw that the underlying mental affliction is ignorance, that grasping to independent me, independent world. And from that, we have two main reactions. Pleasant, attachment. Unpleasant, aversion. So there's pulling and pushing. So they're the two main. And both of those come in many flavors and many levels. And so the aversion at a very low level would simply be maybe just a sort of a little bit of a dislike for that. And then a little bit stronger is, I sort of like that to go away. Or then we get a little bit irritated by it. We get annoyed by it. We really want to try and push it away. And then at another level, we if it's a person, we also, because they seem to be really causing us suffering, then that annoyance or irritation goes another level up and it becomes anger, where we not only want them to go away, we want to harm them because they're really causing me suffering. And then at another level, it can really turn into a lot of hatred, and a sort of extreme level, a lot of rage, where we're really just out of control rage. So these are all very various flavors of the same dynamic of this aversion, wanting to push away. And so we particularly focused on anger because there is this intention to harm there, and therefore it can be very destructive in terms of our behavior with others. Whereas, of course, simply a little bit of aversion is not so destructive when it comes to others. It's maybe not so good for us, but a little bit of aversion is not huge, doesn't create big problems for the other people. But once it gets up to the level of anger, where we have the intention not only to push away the person or be separated from the person, but in addition, the intention to harm them, then we really get into unethical behavior and a lot of suffering, and we really need to address that. That's why often here anger is really very much focused rather than simply the aversion. And so that's what we did in this program.
Okay, thank you. Iftach is asking a technical question.
Mhm.
In the TONG-LEN meditation, do you do the visualization in first person or third person? And do you
Or
take up,
yourself, when you're doing yourself, you mean, or?
yes, when you do the TONG-LEN meditation, do you do it as you visualize yourself or as another person looking at the situation?
Well, if we are doing it for others, it would be first person, me, and then others. If we're doing it for ourselves, what we can do, some people find it more helpful, is they visualize themselves in front of themselves. Whereas I prefer just to, and then you imagine, because then it's the same process. Because if you visualize yourself in front of yourself, then you have the black smoke in your body there and you're pulling the smoke in. Whereas what I did, I didn't do that front visualization of ourself. I just imagined the smoke in the body and drawing into the white light. So you can use that if you find it a bit awkward or not so helpful to not have a visualization there in front of you. So if you're doing with TONG-LEN with respect to yourself, you could do that visualization. Imagine yourself in front of yourself, and then the same process is with others. But for everyone else, then it would be a first person perspective, because the whole purpose of the TONG-LEN is you wanting to take their suffering and you wanting to give your happiness to them.
Okay, and do you take up all the smoke in one breath or in steps?
I mean, whatever you find more effective. Often we feel like, that if something is very difficult, or, maybe there's a lot of suffering or a lot of mental afflictions, then often in life in general, to fix something difficult, we need a lot of effort. And so then if there is some suffering there and we just do one breath, then we think, well, how is that possible that I got rid of all that suffering with just one breath? So you may find it more helpful to continually do it. And then you get a sense that you've put a lot of effort into it, and therefore you've actually got rid of that suffering. Whereas if you do it in one breath, you might think, well, how could I possibly get rid of all that in one breath? So, but you may find that one breath is enough. So it really depends on us as an individual, whether we find it more effective and powerful to do it over a number of breaths or do it on one breath. So we can experiment with that and just use whatever approach we find more effective.
Dror is saying, I found the visualization hard in TONG-LEN, but using the aspiration alone felt like I'm standing next to someone and hoping for something without actually doing any action of taking or giving. Can you elaborate a bit more about ways to focus on the willingness to take, suffer, and give happiness?
Yeah, we can. It's a little bit like the great loving kindness there. We said that, may you be happy, but I will make it so. So if you're just doing the affirmations, you can do a little bit like that, may you be free of suffering and cause, may you be free of mental afflictions. I will take your mental afflictions. I will take your suffering from you. Or if but we are doing that in terms of the visualization. So the visualization replaces that. But if you're not doing the visualization, you can use that affirmation. Not only may you be free of suffering and mental afflictions, I'm going to take your suffering and mental afflictions from you. And then happiness is that we're giving out the happiness that not only say, may you be truly well and happy, I am going to give you my happiness. So that would be the extra affirmation that would replace the visualization of either taking the smoke or giving the light. So that would be what you would do, something like that. We've got time, I think, for at least one more question, if there is one.
Yes. Miriam is asking, in the preliminaries, when cultivating the view of genuine happiness, the true source being within, how can I avoid reinforcing a solid sense of self?
Yeah. So this is where the Vipassana practice is. So remember that is coming within the preliminaries. And in the preliminaries, we're not really addressing so much the solid sense of self yet. And even then, when we go on to shamatha practice, we're still not really addressing solid sense of self. It's only really comes in Vipassana where we, and even in this compassion practice, we didn't really address the solid sense of self. I mean, we can do this TONG-LEN practice quite effectively, like there's a me here and a you there, and I'm doing this with you, and have this sense of duality. So the solid sense of self is only directly addressed within Vipassana practice. That's why if we have an integrated approach, then when we do some Vipassana practice of emptiness, then that will, if we've had some little taste of that, then that will filter in to this practice of TONG-LEN, and it will also filter into shamatha practice. It will filter into all the other practices and then make them even more powerful. And then because they become more powerful, they will filter back into Vipassana practice, and then you go deeper into Vipassana practice. So you'll find that each one of these areas will have a positive effect on the other, and then they will feed back in. So they'll all work together to go much deeper. Whereas if we only engage in one of those four areas, then we're really leaving ourselves short, because here in compassion practice, yes, we can have a very strong sense of grasping, and that can lead to some mental afflictions, which can cause some problems with the compassion practice. Whereas if we engage in some Vipassana practice on the side there, we can reduce that a little bit, and that will create less interference, and actually it will enhance the compassion, the TONG-LEN practice. So again, integrated practice, very helpful, very important. Okay, I think if there's one last quick question, otherwise we'll stop there.
No.
No? Okay. Let's leave it there. And again, let's finish by dedicating all of our efforts here, not only today, but also yesterday for the whole weekend. And we can dedicate all of our efforts on the basis of the Shantideva dedication prayer. So again, I'll go read through the verses. You might like to reflect on the words while I do that. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Thank you very much. I hope to see you in, I think, 2 weeks' time when we go to the Mahamudra retreat. We've got that over 2 weekends. So hope you got something out of this weekend course on the shamatha, the compassion practice on the 4 Immeasurables and Bodhicitta. And again, I hope to see you in 2 weeks' time. So thank you. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very
Bye-bye.
much. Thank you.
See you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. תודה, אסיף, נטלי.
תודה.
תודה רבה לכולם שהשתתפתם ותרגלתם והייתם איתנו בסופש הזה. אנחנו מזכירים שוב שכל הפעילויות נעשות על ידי מתנדבים וממומנות באמצעות דנה. אז אם אתם רוצים לתרגל נדיבות ולתרום למורה הנפלא שלנו ולהמשכיות של כל הפעילויות שלנו, אתם יכולים לעשות את זה באמצעות פייפל או העברה בנקאית, פרטים בדף של האירוע ובאתר ידידי הדרמה. זהו, יש גם את שאר המפגשים ביוטיוב של ידידי הדרמה, אז ממש תודה, ושיהיה לכם אחלה שבוע.
תודה רבה.
Thank you for wonderful teaching, Glen. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was marvelous.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Glen.